Under the cold cobalt rain of destiny, every choice carries a weight that can move mountains or crush spirits. Explore the epic tales of power, sacrifice, and the ultimate price of leadership in our latest series. Click subscribe now and witness the crowning of a new cinematic legend.
Silverware felt cold in my hand even though I hadn't touched it yet. I was gripping the edge of the table instead, my fingers pressing into the white linen so hard I could feel the grain of the wood underneath. Across from me, my brother-in-law was leaning back in his chair like he owned the place, scrolling through his phone with one hand and weighting down the sommelier with the other. I had not invited him. I want to be clear about that before I tell you the rest of this story, because there will be a moment later where you are going to think, why didn't she just say something sooner? Why did she let it get that far? And I understand why you'll think that. I've asked myself the same thing 100 times since that night. But you have to understand what it feels like to be the person who has spent 3 years being the reasonable one, the flexible one, the one who keeps the peace because everyone else is too fragile or too selfish or too entitled to do it themselves. You get tired. And when you're tired, sometimes you let things slide one more time, and then one more time after that, until you are sitting at a corner table in the best restaurant in the city, across from a man who is not invited to your dinner, watching him order a $340 bottle of wine like it's tap water, and you realize the sliding has to stop. My name is not important right now. What is important is that I am 31 years old. I run my own small event planning business, and I have worked every single day for the past 4 years to build something that is actually mine, not my family's. Not my husband's family's. Mine. The dinner that night was a celebration. My biggest client, a woman named Ms. Alderton, who runs 3 boutique hotels across the Southeast, had just renewed our contract for the 3rd year in a row and added 2 new properties to the scope. It was the kind of renewal that meant I could hire a second full-time coordinator. It meant I could stop doing my own bookkeeping at midnight. It was a big deal, the kind of big deal that deserves a real dinner, not takeout on the couch. I had made the reservation 6 weeks in advance. A corner table at Crestwood, which, if you're not from here, is the kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices on the version they hand to guests, and the bread basket alone is worth the drive across town. I reserved it for 3 people, me, my husband, and Ms. Alderton, who had become something close to a mentor over the past 2 years. 3 people. I had confirmed the reservation the morning of. I had texted my husband the address. I had arrived 12 minutes early, ordered sparkling water, and watched the door. My husband walked in at 7:04 with his brother right behind him. I felt my stomach drop. His brother. I'll call him my brother-in-law because that's the most generous thing I can call him right now, is 35 years old and has been in between things for the better part of 2 years. Before that, he was in between different things. He has a loud laugh and a louder opinion about everything, and he has never once in the 4 years I've known him asked me a single question about my work unless it was to suggest I was overcomplicating things. I stood up. I smiled. I hugged my husband and gave his brother a polite nod, and then I looked at my husband with the specific look that married people develop, the one that says, "We are going to talk about this later." And he looked back at me with the look that said, "I know. I'm sorry. It just happened. It just happened." He stopped by the house, my husband explained, as we were all settling into our chairs. He was just going to drop something off. And then, somehow, and my husband said this part quickly and quietly while his brother was reading the menu, somehow he'd mentioned the dinner, and his brother had said it sounded fun, and before my husband could figure out how to uninvite him, they were both in the car. Ms. Alderton arrived at 7:15, gracious and warm as always, and if she noticed that the table had an unexpected addition, she didn't show it. She shook his hand. She took her seat. She asked him what he did, and he answered with the version of the answer that people like him always give. Vague enough to sound intentionally mysterious, specific enough to imply importance. "Consulting," he said. She nodded. I picked up my menu. The first sign was the wine. "Ms. Alderton had barely finished saying she'd love a glass of whatever red we were having when my brother-in-law flagged down the sommelier and started asking about specific bottles. Not the wine list, specific bottles. By name. He mentioned a vineyard in Napa, like he'd been there personally. The sommelier engaged, because that is literally his job, and within 4 minutes, there was a bottle on the table that I had not ordered and had not seen a price for. I looked at my husband. He was looking at the bread basket. I let it go. I shouldn't have. But Ms. Bear. Alderton seemed unbothered, and I didn't want the energy of a confrontation sitting on top of what was supposed to be a celebration dinner. I told myself I would handle it at the end. I told myself it was fine. It was not fine. The appetizers came, and my brother-in-law ordered his own, a charcuterie board that was not part of the table's shared selections, just for himself, without asking anyone. He ate most of it while talking about a deal he was close to closing, the details of which shifted slightly every time he referenced it. Miss Alderton, because she is a professional, redirected the conversation back to the renewal. She asked about my expansion plans. She talked about the new properties. She was warm and engaged and exactly the kind of dinner companion I had looked forward to for weeks. My brother-in-law, because he is who he is, interrupted her twice. The second time, she paused. Just for a moment. She didn't say anything. She just paused, looked at me, and then smoothly continued her sentence. And in that pause, I felt something solidify in my chest. Not anger exactly. Something quieter than anger. Something that had been building for a long time and had just now finished building. He ordered the Wagyu. I want to tell you about the Wagyu because I think it's the detail that will make you understand the specific texture of this man's audacity. The Wagyu at Crestwood comes as a small portion, 4 ounces, because it is Wagyu, because it is served with a reduction that takes 3 days to make. Because it costs what it costs, and everyone at that table except my brother-in-law understood implicitly that it was not a casual order. Ms. Mice, Alderton ordered the salmon. My husband ordered the duck. I ordered the risotto. My brother-in-law looked at the menu, pointed at the Wagyu like he was picking something off a dollar menu, and said, "I'll do the steak." The server wrote it down without blinking. I excused myself to use the restroom. I stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom at Crestwood, which is the kind of bathroom that has real hand towels and a small dish of mints, and I looked at myself for a long moment. I thought about the version of me who would go back to that table and say nothing, who would receive the check at the end of the night, look at the total, and hand over her card because it was easier than making a scene, who would text her best friend afterward and vent for 45 minutes and then let it go. I thought about the $1,800. That's the other part of the story. The part that I had not told Miss Meters, Alderton, had barely even let myself think about in the weeks leading up to this dinner. Because some things you put in a box and close the lid on because reopening them takes more energy than you have. 18 months earlier, my brother-in-law had asked to borrow money. Not from my husband, from me. Specifically from the business account, which he knew I kept separate. He needed it for a deposit on a space he was renting for a pop-up concept, and he promised he'd pay it back within 60 days. My husband asked me to help him out. The family had always helped him out. I was part of the family now. It would mean a lot. I transferred $1,800. The pop-up concept never happened. The 60 days came and went. When I asked about it, gently, then less gently, my brother-in-law said he was working on it, then said the money had gone toward something else, then said I needed to stop being so rigid about it because it was family. Family. There it was again. That word. The one that gets stretched over every inconvenient situation until it means nothing at all, until it just means, you should give me what I want and not ask for it back. I had never been paid back. I had brought it up one more time, 6 months after that, and my husband's mother had looked at me over the dinner table with that particular expression she has, disappointed. Like I'd said something vulgar, and said that money causes more problems in families than anything else and maybe I should just let it go. I let it go. I went back to the table. The entrees arrived. The conversation was easier with food in front of everyone, and Ms. Alderton had the grace to steer things toward lighter ground. My husband told a story about a renovation project we'd been arguing about at home, endearingly, not meanly, and she laughed, and for about 20 minutes it felt like a normal dinner. Then dessert menus came. My brother-in-law did not look at the dessert menu. He looked at the server and asked if they had a whiskey selection. They did. He ordered a pour of something single malt that I did not catch the name of and did not want to know the price of, and then he looked across the table at me and said, completely casually, "This place is great. You should come here for your anniversary," like he was a guest at a restaurant I had recommended to him. Like I was not sitting in a chair at a table I had reserved at a restaurant I had chosen for a dinner I had planned. I smiled. I said, I did not say anything else. When the server came around to check on us near the end of the meal, I quietly asked him to come back to me before he brought the check. He gave me the small professional nod that good servers give when they understand something without being told, and he moved on. Miss Mon. Alderton and my husband got into a side conversation about something. Architecture, I think. She'd asked about the renovation story, and I leaned slightly forward and said to my brother-in-law, at a perfectly normal conversational volume, "By the way, I'm going to ask them to split the check tonight." He looked at me. "Just so you know in advance," I said. "Your portion will be separate." He blinked. "What?" "The dinner tonight is a business dinner," I said. "It's for Ms. Alderton. The reservation was for 3 people." I kept my voice the same temperature as if I were discussing the weather or the renovation or any other thing. "I'm happy you joined us, but I'm not able to expense your portion, so they'll bring you a separate check." He looked at my husband. My husband, to his credit, said nothing. He picked up his water glass and took a sip. "That's kind of awkward," my brother-in-law said. "It doesn't have to be," I said. "It's just 2 checks." I turned back to Ms. Alderton, who had shifted her attention back to our side of the table at some point, and was now looking at me with an expression I will think about for a long time. Not embarrassed on my behalf, not uncomfortable. Just calm. Assessing. She picked up her wine glass and said, "Smart." Just that. Smart. The server came back. I asked for the check to be split, my husband and I on one, my brother-in-law on his own. The server did not even blink. He came back with 2 leather folders. My brother-in-law picked his up. I watched his face move through several emotions in about 4 seconds. He put the folder back down. He picked up his phone. He put it down. He picked up the folder again and opened it and stared at it like maybe the numbers would rearrange themselves into something more manageable. The Wagyu. The charcuterie. The bottle of wine, which I later learned was 280. The single malt whiskey. He put his card in the folder. I signed my own check and handed it back. A few minutes passed. The server returned. He set the leather folder back in front of my brother-in-law with the card inside it. He murmured something quiet and professional. My brother-in-law pulled his card out, put a different one in. The server came back again. Same quiet murmur. My brother-in-law's jaw tightened. He looked at me once, quickly, and then looked away. He put a 3rd card in. Ms. Alderton was checking her coat. My husband was talking to her about something. I sat with my hands folded on the table and waited. The server came back a 3rd time. My brother-in-law pushed back from the table and said he'd be right back. He was going to call his bank. Something was wrong with the chip on his card. He walked toward the front of the restaurant with his phone to his ear. Ms. Alderton touched my arm. "I've had dinners like this," she said quietly. "You handled that with a lot more grace than I had at your age." I don't know exactly why that made me want to cry, but it did. I kept it together. My brother-in-law came back and said, and I want you to notice the specific architecture of this sentence, "I don't have a way to cover this tonight. I'll get you back." Not "I'm sorry." Not "I didn't realize." Not "I shouldn't have ordered what I ordered at a dinner I wasn't invited to." He'll get me back. I looked at him. I thought about the $1,800. I thought about 60 days. I thought about the word family being stretched like taffy over a situation where one person takes and another person gives, and no one is allowed to name what's actually happening. "You can settle it with the restaurant directly," I said. "They'll work something out with you." "What does that mean?" he said. "It means it's your check," I said. "So it's your conversation to have with them." I stood up. I shook Ms. Alderton's hand. I thanked her for dinner. I kissed my husband on the cheek and said I'd get the car, and I walked out of Crestwood into the cool night air and stood next to the valet stand and breathed. My husband came out 5 minutes later. We drove home without talking for a while. Not an angry silence, more like the kind of silence that happens when something has shifted and you both know it and you're both waiting to make sure the shift is real before you start talking about it. He said, "I should have told him he couldn't come." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'll deal with it." I said, "I know you will." And then I said the other thing, the thing I had not said in 18 months, the thing I had put in a box and closed the lid on. I want the $1,800 back. I don't care how long it takes. I want a real timeline, in writing, and I want it paid back. All of it. My husband was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay." Just that. "Okay. I don't know if you have ever spent years being the person who absorbs things, who keeps the peace, who lets it go, who says family is family and moves on, and then had one specific evening where you just stopped absorbing, where you looked at the bill, metaphorically and literally, and decided that you were done paying for things you hadn't ordered? It's a strange feeling. It doesn't feel triumphant, not exactly. It feels more like setting something heavy down. Like your hands are shaking a little from having held it so long, and also from the relief of finally not holding it anymore. The restaurant worked out a payment arrangement with my brother-in-law for his check. I found out later from my husband. I don't know the details, and I don't need to. Miss Bryce Alderton texted me the next morning. She said the food was excellent and the company was interesting, and she was already looking forward to the kickoff meeting for the new property. The $1,800 arrived in my business account 11 weeks later in 3 installments with no explanation and no apology. I deposited it without comment. I have thought about that dinner many times since then. Not with regret, but with a kind of clarity that I wish I'd had earlier. The clarity that says you are allowed to say what the dinner is for and who it is for and who it is expected to pay for their own choices. You are allowed to ask for what you're owed. You are allowed to do those things quietly, without making a scene, without raising your voice, and without apologizing for any of it. Separate checks is not a punishment. It is just the truth. Some people eat at your table for years and never once ask whose name is on the reservation. And the moment you ask them to pay for their own meal, they act like you've done something cruel. You haven't. You just stopped paying for their Wagyu. Have you ever had to finally separate the checks in your own life? Not just at a restaurant, I mean in the bigger sense. The moment you stopped covering for someone who never once covered for you? I'd really love to know. Leave it in the comments. Because I think there are a lot of us out there who have been holding the check for a long time, and sometimes it helps just to know you're not alone. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in some abstract philosophical way, just in the very specific, practical way that comes from watching someone order a $280 bottle of wine at your dinner and then discover their cards don't work when the check arrives. There's a version of that night where I paid for everything. I've lived that version before, more times than I want to count. I've handed over the card, smiled, told myself it was fine, and driven home with that particular hollow feeling. Not quite anger, not quite sadness, just the weight of having let something happen to yourself that you knew you shouldn't have allowed. That feeling has a texture. I know it well. What I've come to understand, slowly, the way you only understand things that cost you something, is that enabling someone's worst behavior is not kindness. It looks like kindness from the outside. It feels like keeping the peace. But what it actually is a loan with no terms and no end date. And the person on the other side of that loan never asked for your forgiveness because they never thought they did anything wrong. Why would they? You kept covering it. You kept letting it go. The message you sent over and over every time you handed over your card or your silence or your $1,800 was, "This is acceptable. Keep going." The moment I said separate checks at that table, I wasn't punishing him. I want to be clear about that. Punishment implies I had power over him. I didn't. I just stopped absorbing the cost of his choices. That's a different thing entirely. It's quiet. It doesn't require an audience. It doesn't require him to admit anything or apologize for anything. It just requires you to decide that the bill in front of you is not yours to pay. The $1,800 came back. Not quickly and not with any grace, but it came back, and I think about what that means. Not as some kind of cosmic reward for doing the right thing, but as a simple, logical outcome. When the free ride ends, people find other arrangements. That's not justice. That's just what happens when you stop making it easy for someone to not deal with their own responsibilities. What I wish I'd understood earlier, and what I hope is useful to someone reading this who is still in the version of the story where they're handing over the card, is that intelligence, without the courage to act on it, is just suffering with good vocabulary. I knew for 18 months that the $1,800 wasn't coming back. I knew that night at Crestwood that I was watching a pattern repeat itself in real time. Knowing wasn't the hard part. The hard part was deciding that what I knew mattered enough to act on. That's the thing about integrity that nobody really talks about. It's not dramatic. It's not a confrontation or a speech or a moment where everyone in the room understands what just happened. It's quieter than that. It's asking for separate checks at a normal volume and then turning back to your client and continuing the conversation. It's driving home in silence and then saying the thing you've needed to say for a year and a half. It's depositing 3 installments into your business account without ceremony. Ms. Alderton said smart and went back to her wine. That was enough.